So let's first just quickly talk about the pillars of ACT, and then I'll talk about this goodness of fit thing. So the pillars of ACT are acceptance, right? Non-judgmentally embracing the full spectrum of emotions, contact with the present moment, observing your thoughts with curiosity instead of judgment. Cognitive diffusion. This is the ability to gain perspective on our painful inner experiences rather than being in the tunnel and fused with them where they're driving the bus. We get to kind of see them for what they are. So like, instead of seeing from feelings or thoughts, instead of looking from them, being able to look at them. That's diffusion. It's not really the best term, but anyway, another psychologist prefers that this acceptance-based practice is called stepping out. I think that's a better term. And then self as context is the idea of being the witness of your experience rather than your experiences themselves, being able to see from appropriate distance. Values is another part of the ACT approach, which is just really about what matters to the person, and then committed actions, taking steps. So those are sort of the pillars of ACT. And the goodness of fit between ACT and psychedelic assisted therapy, I mean, both are supported by the idea. I think this is quite exciting, actually, because there really is a wonderful convergence here. And, both are supported by the idea that our quality of life comes from emotional flexibility, not emotional strength. I was going to say something. Let's just quickly say what is emotional flexibility, and then I'll kind of go back up to the goodness of fit. So what is emotional flexibility? First, what it is not. The opposite of emotional flexibility is actually emotional strength, because this is emotional suppression. And sometimes you see these articles about like 3 things emotionally strong people do. I'm always like, oh, cringe. This is our culture of emotional suppression and avoidance, focusing on this idea of emotional strength. If you want to be emotionally strong, whatever that means, I think it means resilient. If you really want to be emotionally resilient, be emotionally flexible. Let your heart break. It's like the idea of the big, strong, thick tree in the storm that snaps versus the little whippy one that's flexible, that just bends and is still there the next day. It's the same with people. Of course, psychedelic medicines, as I said before, medicines of grief and love, because they most often take us to the hidden pain, or they remove the obstacles to seeing the inherent love we possess for ourselves and for others. And so this idea of grief and love, this is the coin of willingness. Your quality of life depends on this, being able to be with life when it hurts and to not recoil and still take valued steps allows us to experience joy. In other words, life is bittersweet, and you don't get the sweet without being able to embrace the bitter. I like this attitude of trying to cultivate an attitude of grieving and grateful, being grateful and grieving in the same moment. It's not one or the other, often it's both. And so this is emotional flexibility or psychological flexibility. And then I think this idea of emotional strength, it's actually rigidity and a resistance to being open to life. So psychedelic medicines or psychedelic assisted therapy can increase this personality factor of openness, making people more open to experience, and also to return people to developmental, earlier social windows of developmental social learning. The idea you can't teach an old dog new tricks. Well, what if you could make an old dog feel young at heart? I think that's something that these medicines sort of offer. The old dog might be able to learn some new things when feeling young at heart. There's research that shows MDMA opens up this returns people to this earlier state of neuroplastic learning, social learning. In our adolescence, we're really influenced and conditioned by our relationships with others, and then the clay hardens a little bit. And so these medicines can enhance neuroplasticity, and the same thing with acceptance and commitment therapy. It really works on enhancing neuroplasticity. So I just want to give that first on the difference between emotional flexibility and emotional strength. So now I want to speak to this goodness of fit again.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's a real goodness of fit, and this is in this approach from Yale, what they have found with their approach to depression, really how ACT plus psychedelic therapy builds upon the neurobiological actions of the medication, this heightened neuroplasticity and altered functional connectivity. And so that just means that that increasing psychological flexibility means a greater acceptance of internal discomfort. That's when we have heightened neuroplasticity. These medicines allow that. We can kind of face our pain without getting tense or rigid, and people can kind of learn to carry it in a different way with the right support. And similarly, studies show that psychedelics induce a state of consciousness that disrupts brain activity and allows for communication between different areas of the brain that are usually isolated from one another, right? So there's this sort of goodness of fit here between both using the gains from the medicine. ACT can like support the gains that come from these medicine modalities and help the person integrate the gains in a more effective way. There's sort of a back and forth. The medicine can support ACT process, and ACT process reinforces medicine effects. So why is this important? Well, in the Yale manual, again, this will be a resource people will be able to look at. And it's a wonderful thing that they've created, a wonderful resource. A lot of work that's gone into that. And they make this point that, you know, traditional psychedelic therapy is sort of supportive, not linked to particular orientations, doesn't target particular specific disorders. Instead, it's the idea of providing containment, safety, clear guidelines to help the person navigate the experience. Yeah. And that's great. And it can lead to change. I think their argument is we can do better at supporting people at integrating the change by having a structured modality that supports the same processes that are elicited through the medicine experience. Okay. And so really the argument for ACT model of psychedelic assisted therapy is about maximizing the benefits between the therapy and the medicine, and that there's this synergistic potential. You know, because I think this is something we often see and people talk about, you know, they're like, oh, this feels so good, or I'm seeing this truth, or this wisdom is so important and I'm going to act on it. What if I forget it? What happens when I lose it? I don't want to lose it, right? And it's like, I'm sorry, it's going to wear off, you know? So I think it's really then about how do we get better at preparing people to go into the territory, especially, well, let me just say the overview. How do we get better at doing the preparation piece, and how do we get better at supporting people with the integration piece in a really sustained way that's going to allow them to integrate the wisdom that was revealed and make it actionable and enduring to support their quality of life. What was I going to say about the preparation piece? Yeah, so I think when there's a couple of things that are going to happen in this, you know, movement and renaissance that we're seeing. It's interesting right now because let's just say a lot of people that are doing these modalities, finding their way to them, other than maybe clinical trials, but there's other ways that people are finding their way to them. They're kind of already woo, if I can just say it like that. Yet there's a huge portion of the suffering population right now that is not woo, meaning they're going to have their minds blown and they're not going to have the capacity to integrate. So I'll say it more clearly. There's a lot of psychedelically naive folks out there that are not prepared to enter the territory. And if we throw them into the deep end, that could be a really, really bad idea and might not go well. Or a less kind of catastrophizing way of saying it might be, we just might not be able to help them maximize the gains as much. Yeah. There's two things here that I think are really important for this movement. Well, one is the bottleneck in training, right? Which is also just why it's so great that, you know, the people who are here investing in this course are doing it. Thank you. Thank you for showing up. All hearts on deck. We are not going to have enough therapists and people to meet the demand. And it's really rigorous. And this is a lifelong discipline in training and learning to do this work. And so thank you for getting started in it now. And And we're going to have a bottleneck in terms of being able to train enough effective therapists to really meet the need. And the second thing that I'm sort of thinking about is, again, that piece about what happens when the psychedelically naive are dropped into the mystical. How do we help them come back and integrate that? You know, so I think ACT can really offer something here in terms of preparing people for the territory and giving them tools and skills to engage with the material, the often suppressed material that might break through into their consciousness, and to be able to engage in it in a really effective way to increase and improve their quality of life. So, you know, really the big picture is by blending ACT with psychedelic assisted therapy, we can build a framework that allows clients to change their maladaptive thought and behavior patterns while developing awareness of and engagement in values-based living. The slogan of this pairing might be, combining ACT with psychedelic assisted therapy leads to improvements in quality of life through the development of greater psychological flexibility. Mm-hmm. And I think I would just also like to add that, you know, the intensity of the psychedelic experience might connect people with some of the pillars of ACT, like the contact with the present moment. This idea of letting go or acceptance, right? This is something these medicines can take people to, and this is another pillar of ACT. And these are skills that can be taught in preparation.